Hello classy people, this is Josh the Top Hat Gamer, and this week I'm reviewing Mighty No. 9. It's no secret that everyone loves Mega Man, and it'd be fair to say that Capcom hasn't really shown the Blue Bomber the love that he deserves over the last few years. So when Keiji Inafune, one of the men most commonly associated with Mega Man, announced a Kickstarter campaign to fund a spiritual successor to the iconic series, fans spoke with their wallets and poured close to $4 million into the project. So now that the game is finally here, it's time to see if Mighty No. 9 is actually any good. Mighty No. 9 puts players in control of Beck, the 9th unit in a set of combat robots known as the Mighty Numbers. When the world is plunged into chaos by a computer virus that turns robots rogue, Beck is strangely unaffected, leaving him as the only way to combat the rogue Mighty Numbers and their rebel robot armies. The plot is pretty basic, and although the game tries to keep players invested by throwing in a few twists and turns, none of it is overly interesting. Part of why I found it hard to get invested in the story and characters is that the main cast of characters aren't likable, not helped by stilted, lifeless voice acting that honestly made me want to skip through narrative cutscenes. The bosses on the other hand have generally pretty good voice work, with some standout performances from Matt Mercer and Steve Blum among others. Weirdly, the voice acting is the most memorable part of Mighty No. 9's audio design, as the tracks for each level just don't have the same distinct charm as the series the game is trying so hard to replicate. Mighty No. 9 also comes up short with regards to its visual design. The Saturday morning cartoon style has its merits, but the character models are blocky and ugly, and the majority of the game's environments are mostly bland. There are a couple of standout levels, but more often than not, the game looks cheap and forgettable. In terms of gameplay, Mighty No. 9 fares a little bit better, but not by much. The core gameplay is just straight up Mega Man. Usually you run to the right, jump and shoot, and you beat the bosses. Unfortunately, the controls just aren't nearly as responsive as they need to be, causing frustrating deaths when the jump button refuses to work. And Beck's hitbox is unclear at the best of times, making precision platforming a pain in the ass when insta-kill surfaces rear their ugly heads. The platforming isn't all bad though, as Mighty No. 9 implements a pretty useful dash ability to speed things along and allow you to traverse larger gaps than standard jumps will allow. But the dash also has combat applications, as Beck can destabilize enemies by shooting them and then dash into them to absorb their powers. Weirdly, the game never explains how this works. You can absorb enemies of the same type in rapid succession, gaining you power boosts in terms of attack and speed, as well as giving you consumable health regeneration. The mechanic gives players an incentive to deal with enemies quickly and think about enemy placement a little bit more than usual, but fails to tell you the information necessary to make the most out of the ability. The game also fails to explain how to use health consumables, how to use certain moves, and even that bosses don't freeze like usual enemies when they become destabilized. For a relatively simple game, Mighty No. 9 has a serious problem with conveyance. Even with some of the game's basic problems, it does have some shining moments. The boss battles in particular are clear highlights of Mighty No. 9, with unique patterns that are easy to recognize, but a bit more difficult to avoid. Probably the most interesting aspect of the boss fights is the implementation of Beck's dash move. It's necessary to build up damage by attacking the bosses, then cashing that damage in by dashing at the enemy when they destabilize. There are a couple of frustrating moments when the boss whips out a never-before-seen insta-kill move, but these are fairly rare in the grand scheme of things. You can make each boss fight a little bit easier by defeating them in a certain order and then using your assimilated boss abilities in the fight. Just like Mega Man, surprise surprise. Figuring out which weapon to use on which boss is one of the cooler aspects of Mega Man, but Mighty No. 9 straight up tells you whose weapon works on who, removing a bit of the charm. Additionally, very few of the boss's weapons feel overly useful outside of boss fights, with the exception of Battalion's missiles or Brandish's swords. Certain powers work great for traversal in very specific spots, but they're a rare exception. Mighty No. 9 does itself no favors by trying to emulate Mega Man so completely, as it comes off feeling like a pretender to the throne rather than a successor. The gameplay isn't as tight or responsive as the games that inspired it, and it comes off more frustrating than entertaining, despite the addition of one very handy mechanic. To top it off, Mighty No. 9 comes up lacking in its presentation, where the blocky, unappealing visuals and inconsistent audio leave it feeling cheap and almost unfinished. Mighty No. 9 gets the Top Hat Gamer rating of bad. From its poor presentation to its boring story, Mighty No. 9 fails to impress, and for every step it makes in the right direction, it takes 2 steps back and falls into an insta-kill death trap. Mega Man fans might be tempted to take a look at this one, but I strongly advise against it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the review informative. If you missed last week's review of Mirror's Edge Catalyst, click the annotation. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time to delete this off my PS4.